God's Symphony of Redemption. As we've been thinking about the second movement of this symphony, been focused upon God's promise to Abraham and how that covenant promise is continuing through his children and his children's children until we've reached our study today, where we're going to be thinking specifically about Joseph. When you hear the phrase living the dream, and yes, it's a pun because of Joseph, when you hear that phrase, living the dream, what do you think about? You know, that's a phrase that is somewhat popularized in our culture. The idea that I have this or I have that, I'm getting to do this, I'm getting to do that, and therefore I am living the dream. And usually when you see that, someone's in Barbados or Tortuga doing some crazy thing in some beautiful place, or they're standing in front of their McLaren or their really nice Corvette or something, and they're saying, I'm living the dream. Rarely do you see a mother covered in spit up from a baby with a house that's a mess because you can't keep up with the kids nonstop at that moment saying living the dream, right? That's not the perspective that we have. We see the glamour of the world, the all that glitters is gold kind of stuff, and we say, man, we're living the dream, and yet most of life does not look like that. I want to challenge that idea this morning. That the McLaren, the Corvette, the luxury life is living the dream. I want to challenge that by looking at Joseph's life. And I want us to think about what God does through and with Joseph, and how Joseph, being the dreamer, actually through all that he's doing is actually living the dream. Follow me this morning, if you will. We're going to begin in Genesis 37. We're talking about the many dreams that we find throughout the context of this section of Scripture. You know, as we come toward Genesis 37, we have seen creation, and we have seen the flood and the fall. We have seen the Tower of Babel and man scattered. We've seen the call of Abraham and then Isaac thereafter, and Jacob, now Israel at this point in the text thereafter. And now we're to his children, that is Israel's children. And from chapter 37 through the end of the book of Genesis, we are basically consumed with the life of Joseph in particular and his brothers. There's a little detour in chapter 38 with Judah and Tamar. We're skipping over that, not because it's not important to study it, but because it's not applicable to looking at Joseph's life today. But thinking about Joseph's life and the manifold dreams, this is a layout of his life. And I just want to put this out before you, because when we're introduced to Joseph in chapter 31 at verse 17, Joseph's father Jacob moving, Joseph is somewhere around 6 years old based on the ages that are given. When we're introduced to Joseph in particular in chapter 37, he's 17 years old. So when he's being sold into slavery, Joseph is 17 years old. The text explicitly says it. And you can march through his life using points in Genesis based on the dating of other individuals, the giving of ages, so that by the time he is sold to Potiphar in Egypt, he's 17-ish. By the time he interprets the dream, somewhere around 28. His grandfather Isaac actually dies, though it's recorded chronologically kind of out of order in Genesis, when he's 29. So he's in Egypt when that actually happens. He interprets Pharaoh's dream, released from prison around 30 years old, and then everything else thereafter transpires, and he is there in Egypt for 80 years till he dies at the age of 110. And so Joseph begins to experience all of these difficulties at 17 years old. Now think about that. He's a young man. Now I know 17 then and 17 now aren't necessarily the same thing. Joseph wasn't staying up all night drinking Mountain Dew and playing on an Xbox, right? He wasn't doing that. He wasn't gaming in front of a PC. He had real responsibilities in a real world with a real life. But he's still only 17 years old when all of these things are going to come upon him. And when he is made second only to Pharaoh in Egypt, the man is only 30 years old. And he is doing all of these things. So there's about 13 years of his life, from the time he's sold into slavery until he is exalted out of that slavery. So he lives in that for 13 years. Just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. This isn't a short 6-month jaunt through Potiphar's house, then into the prison, and then to Pharaoh's side. This is over the course of more than a decade of his life that he's dealing with these things. And it all begins in Genesis 37, the dreams of grandeur. Now, when we hear that, we sometimes think of it in a negative sense. Here in Genesis 37, it is not so at all. Joseph is introduced to us right away as really being righteous in his dealings. His brothers, as we've already seen with Dinah and that circumstance, they're not particularly always on the up and up. As we'll see in how they treat Joseph, most of you already know that story. They sell him into slavery. They're not on the up and up. Judah, his dealings with Tamar, he doesn't exactly conduct himself in a way that we would think is good by any means. And so his brothers are quite an interesting group. And as we talked about last Sunday with the consequences, you can kind of understand that some of their behavior, you can see the seeds of that in his father, in their father, and in their parents before them. But Joseph is righteous. We're introduced to him this way. Now Jacob dwelled in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. This is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. He brought a bad report of them. This is how we're introduced to him. Now, with everything else we know about the brothers, there's nothing to give us any indication other than to point to the fact that Joseph is doing what is right here. These flocks are the property of his father. He has absolutely every right and responsibility before his father to do so in regard with what his father would expect. And the brothers, they are not reliable based on what we've seen around. We don't know what they're up to. But whatever they're up to, Joseph sees it goes back to his father, and his father isn't keen on it. Now that begins to breed resentment because Joseph is also what? The favorite. Because if you read verses 3 and 4, now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak, peaceably to him. They couldn't speak peaceably to him. That's an interesting turn of phrase, isn't it? Have you ever had anyone in your life that you just could not have a single conversation with them without that conversation going sideways? That's what Genesis is describing here. A reality that Joseph and his brothers just could not interact with each other at all in any way peaceable at all. Now, you've got to wonder what Jacob is thinking through all this, but we're not told that, right? We're not told what Israel is thinking throughout the course of all this, other than we see his behavior, and he's not helping the situation because of everything that transpires. Beginning at verse 5, Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed your sheaf stood all around and bowed down on my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream, and told it to his brothers, and said, Look, I have dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down to me. So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him." Now, of all the folks that are going to rebuke Jacob, his father, boy, that's kind of a unique one, right? Because if you remember when we're looking at Jacob, as he's leaving Canaan, what does God do? Appear to him in a dream. And there's a ladder from heaven with the angels ascending and descending, and God is there pictured at the top of the ladder. And Jacob wakes from that dream and he says, God is surely in this place. Now comes his son a little bit later, and his son has a dream that relates to something regarding his father and his brothers and them bowing down. And instead of saying, perhaps this is from God, he rebukes him and says, "What is this dream that you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" Well, there's some pride here, right? It's pride. And that pride continues to breed resentment. The pride isn't Joseph's. The pride is that of the brothers and even his own father. And so we have a situation now where Joseph has had this dream, these dreams of grandeur. His brothers bowing down to him, he's exalted above them. His father, mother, which at this point she's past, but speaking for the whole of the household, bowing down to him. Dreams of grandeur. And what's the result of all of this? I'm sorry. It is that time of year, isn't it? And I even took my allergy meds this morning. No, I don't need that, brother. That's only going to make it worse for me this morning. I appreciate you. See, a brother's always there when you're in need, isn't he? Thank you. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, we're picking up at verses 12 and 13, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. So he said to them, here I am. And then he said to them, please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. Now, Hebron is in southern Israel. We're down below Jerusalem, and he sends him all the way north to Shechem. This is a journey, by the way, on foot of a couple of days at minimum. And he comes to Shechem, and he can't find his brothers. And he says, certain man found him. There he was, wandering in the field. The man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? So he said, I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they've departed from here, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. Now that's even further north. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Now this is the plotting of fratricide, isn't it? And this is the third time in the book of Genesis where we see this kind of thing either being plotted or carried out. The first one, well known, Cain and Abel. The second one, we've already talked about that as well, right? Jacob, Joseph's father, and his brother Esau. Esau says, the time of mourning for my dad is at hand. When that's done, I'm going to kill him. Well, again, this seems to be running in the family, right? We'll solve the problem by murder. Murder never solves anything. But that's what they're plotting. We'll just get rid of him. Well, we know how this goes. They end up selling him for some silver. Silver speaks more loudly here. Reuben's trying to save his brother, and well, he's not successful in the end. He saves him from death, but not successful in saving him, bringing him back to his father, because here come some Ishmaelite traders along the way, and oh, look, they'll offer us 20 pieces of silver for our brother. Boy, some money in the pocket's a whole lot better than a body we've got to bury. So they sell him. And then the problem of the father arises. You can't just go home and say, hey, Dad, guess what? We've got some silver. Where'd you get it? We sold your son, Joseph. We decided we didn't need that extra one around, extra mouth to feed, and also, here's a little silver in your pocket, Dad. We don't need Joseph anymore. You can't just do that, right? Under normal circumstances, at least, you can't just do something like that. And so they take his coat, they tear it, they take the blood of a beast, they smear it on there, and then they bring it to Dad and say, is this the coat of your son? They know what it is, right? That's one of those deceptive statements we studied a few years ago. They're leading their father astray. And their father, as you read toward the end of the chapter, he thinks he's just going to die when he sees this. Verse 34, Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth on his waist, and mourned for his son many days. And all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. So you just put all of this together in Genesis 37, and look at Joseph's situation. His father favors him. That's not Joseph's fault. His brothers hate him partially because of the dreams. They sell him into slavery. The father is deceived. Joseph is not in a great place here, is he? As we look at the situation, if that was you and you were in Joseph's shoes, your family hated you enough to sell you away into slavery to somebody, you'd say, I'm in a bad place. I found myself in a bad spot. Well, he's sold into Potiphar's house. Genesis 38 detours through Judah and Tamar. We come to Genesis 39, and the account with Joseph picks up. And as he's there in Potiphar's house in Egypt, well, here's what we read about Potiphar's wife concerning Joseph. She had longing eyes for him. Came to pass after these things, as master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, lie with me. But Joseph, he's a man of faith. Even at this young age, he's learned to trust God. Obviously, something went right somewhere along the way in that regard, because verse 8, he says, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he's committed all that he has in my hand. Now notice verse 9, there is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? What's that tell us? Joseph has faith. He says, I can't do wrong by Potiphar. Potiphar's trusted me. How could I sin? Obviously, sin's against God, but Joseph recognized I would be doing wrong by myself and against God. And Joseph's got some wisdom here, doesn't he? He's a young man. He has some wisdom. Now, day by day, she continually tries to convince him to come into her. And he, day by day, continually says, nope, 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 not going to do that. Until finally, we read in verses 13 through 18 of the text, what she do? She grabs him, and he leaves his garment, and so she's there with his garment and decides, I can make something out of this. She's a scorned woman here, isn't she? And so she does what sometimes individuals who've been scorned does. She called, verse 14, to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he's brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. That's Potiphar. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came into me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out, they left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was arose. Now, gentlemen, if you're Potiphar, you can appreciate his place here, can't you? You're being told this and this happened. She has some evidence in her hands. It seems to indicate her story is true. So Potiphar confines him, throws him into prison. Verse 20, Joseph's master took him, put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. Now, his dreams of grandeur ended up getting him sold into Egypt. So dreams from God, but he was sold into Egypt. Her dreams of adultery ended up getting him put into prison, right? But notice something here. Joseph, while he runs out from her, he obviously doesn't try to flee the whole scene. It's interesting. He's to be found when accounting is to be made. He's there. And he's cast into prison. So far, Joseph's life is going along, went way down. Okay, he's a slave, but Potiphar's house, God has blessed him. Things are going well. Everything's committed. Kind of back up a little bit, right? And then this happens, and boy, he's back down again. And this time he's in prison. And now we have some dreams of departure in Genesis 39:19 through 48, verse 22. And we're not going to read all of this. The baker and butler, Pharaoh got mad with his baker and with his butler. Butler here is more like a cupbearer. It's translated as butler in the New King James. He's the one who would have sampled the wine before giving it to Pharaoh, in essence, to make sure that nobody did anything with this, because Pharaoh wants to live, and he's a powerful man, and there are powers that be when you're a powerful man in that age who might want to see you removed, and poison was a tremendously good way to see that happen. So the cupbearer take a little sip of the drink the beverage he was about to give to the Pharaoh, and if he's okay, then hey, I can give this on to Pharaoh. But if he starts to foam at the mouth and pass out, Pharaoh knows I better not drink that, right? Goes find me a new cupbearer. I'm going to need one as he's dying. Well, Pharaoh had become mad at the cupbearer and the baker. He'd thrown them into prison. They have dreams. Ultimately, Joseph interprets the dreams for them. The cupbearer is going to be restored, and the baker, he's going to be dead at the hands of Pharaoh. Pharaoh will restore one, kill the other. But Joseph's request in all of this. Now, again, he's blessed while he's in the prison. In fact, we could read back at verse 22 of chapter 39. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did, it was his doing. So his life is back up a little bit, but it can only be up so far when you're in prison, right? I mean, even with all that trustworthiness, you're still confined. You're still in prison. He says, just remember me. Verses 14 and 15. When he speaks to the cupbearer and interprets the dream, but remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house, for indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I've done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon. Dreams of departure. The cupbearer and the baker both went out, and Joseph does too, right? And all he says to the cupbearer is, hey, listen, when you're out, don't forget about me. I shouldn't be here. This is unjust. You'll be back at Pharaoh's side again. The idea being that perhaps you can plead to Pharaoh on my behalf, right? That's got to be the expectation. I didn't do anything to Potiphar's wife. I was sold as a slave into Egypt unjustly. There's no reason why I should be where I am. Please remember me. Well, he isn't remembered. And then we come to chapter 41 and we have more dreams. That's why I titled this first section, Manifold Dreams, right? Many dreams. And these are dreams of plenty and famine. Pharaoh dreams these dreams, and it involves the heads of grain that come up plump and good, and those that come up, well, looking awfully sickly. And the sickly devour the plump and good ultimately. And he dreams about some cattle, same kind of thing. Good-looking cattle, 7 of them. Bad-looking cattle devour the good-looking cattle. And Pharaoh is troubled by his dreams. Verse 8 of chapter 41, it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men, and Pharaoh told him his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. Now Joseph has already interpreted some dreams, hasn't he? For the cupbearer and for the baker. And if you've read the full text here, we can't for the sake of time, you know his interpretations were accurate because God was giving them through Joseph ultimately. All of this is God working. We'll see that more explicitly in a moment. I want to point some things out. And this is when Joseph is remembered. Because we read at verse 9, the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh saying, I remember my faults this day. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker, we each had a dream, and one night he and I, each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream, and it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So, this man knows how to interpret dreams, Pharaoh. Verses 14 through 36, let's summarize it quickly. Pharaoh calls for Joseph. Pharaoh calls for Joseph and says, hey, listen, I want to know the meaning of my dreams. I need to know them. And Joseph explains them to him. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. The whole earth is going to thirst, and that thirst is not going to be able to be quenched. And so you've got to store up grain in the cities during these 7 years of plenty. And so you'll have food to feed when the 7 years of famine come. This is what God says these dreams mean. They're not 2 dreams, they're 1 dream, Pharaoh. And Pharaoh looks at Joseph and says, is there anyone in the land like this man? Verse 37 beginning, so the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh says to him, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Now, Joseph's situation now has drastically changed, hasn't it? He's no longer a slave. That's evident, right? He's not a slave to anyone now. He's second in command only to Pharaoh. Pharaoh commits basically the entire civilization of ancient Egypt at this point, which is a thriving civilization, by the way, into the hands of a young Hebrew man who through God can interpret dreams. And then when you turn to chapters 42 through 45, there are dreams of reunion. Because that dream that started this all back in chapter 37, the one with the sheaves and the sun and the moon, it all comes true. Because the famine hits, the land is desolate, all up through Canaan and otherwise, where still Joseph's brothers and father live and their families. And they hear that in Egypt there is some grain. And so chapter 42 has them coming to Joseph. And we read this beginning at verse 6. Now Joseph was governor over all the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. It happened, didn't it? We're not going to bow down to you. You're the younger brother. Not the youngest, Benjamin is, but you're awfully far down that line, Joseph. And here they are on their knees before him. The one they put in a pit and stripped and sold for 20 pieces of silver, they are now on their knees before, needing from him what he can offer them. They need food. This is a matter of life or death for their families, isn't it? Famine will kill without regard for status when it hits a land. Jacob's family, they were wealthy. Abraham had been blessed richly. That had continued on. Everything in the text throughout the course of Genesis, Jacob has wealth. He has money. What he doesn't have right now is food. He doesn't have grain. A famine's hit the land. The crops aren't producing. If he is going to survive this famine, he needs to be able to eat and feed his family. He's the patriarch, right? Jacob's the patriarch. He sent his sons. And so Joseph literally holds life and death over the head of his family. So when we think about his behavior in this context and all that his brothers did, remember, Joseph literally has the power of life or death at this moment. If he refuses to feed them, provide for them, most likely they're going to die. Other people in the land are going to die. That's how famine works. Go and look at communist Russia and the way famine was used as a tool to be waged against populaces. Famine can hit due to natural causes. Famine can hit due to political purposes. But the end is always the same: suffering and death. That's where Joseph's at. Then he said to them, Joseph saw his brothers, recognized them, verse 7. He acted as a stranger to them, spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, where do you come from? They said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Now, those of you who have lived through that transition from your latter teenage years to your 30s, the pictures start to look quite different by the time you're hitting 30, don't they? You can still see the young you there, but you realize the young you is quickly diminishing and the older you is quickly taking over, right? Some of you shake your head right now. You're like, man, I'm in that right now. I'm seeing that difference in my pictures. It's hard to deal with. Well, put that in the picture. Put that into your mind with regards to Joseph. His brothers haven't seen him since he was a teenager. And now he's 30 years old. He's a father with children. He's a grown man. He looks different. Last they saw him, he was in this coat of many colors. Now he's in the finest linen with the gold around his neck. He has the picture of rule and authority. The signet ring of Pharaoh. This man, when you look at him, looks like a man of strength and power because that's what he is. Not the 17-year-old boy you stripped and left in the hole until you could sell him. They don't recognize him. But Joseph recognizes them. Remember, several of his brothers are substantially older than him. He's going to see them and immediately know that face. I know you. And he's going to remember those voices that he probably heard, those faces that he probably remembered every single night that he was away from home for many, many days. When bad things happen to you, do the faces of those individuals involved, does that not re-enter your mind over time? Do you recall, rethink? That's Joseph. That's where he's at. He knows who they are. Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. And over the course of the next several chapters, ultimately, Joseph tests them. Now, I'm going to submit to you, I think, as you read this and knowing Joseph's character, these tests are not Joseph trying to be petty and poke at his brothers. These tests are really meant to root out, who are these men now? Do they know what they've done? Do they recognize where they've been and what they've done? But then we come to chapter 45, and Joseph finally could not restrain himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stood with him while Joseph made himself known to his brothers, and he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard it. Dreams of reunion realized fully in this moment. There were dreams of grandeur, adultery, departure, plenty and famine, and reunion. Now, as we look throughout this text, what do we see? What do we see that we can really take home with us when we leave out of those doors today? I want to submit to you that we see two things that need to go together in our lives: providence and faith. Providence, we see God working. Faith, we see Joseph accepting. Now let's put this all together. Joseph was right where God wanted him to be. The brothers were in Dothan. They weren't in Shechem. They were in Dothan. And who's going to pass by? The traders. They happen to be in the city at the time when the traders are going to pass by. Well, that's quite a coincidence, isn't it? They don't have to stash him for a week or two while they're trying to figure out when can we get the traders. No, the traders are coming by. They've thrown Joseph in the pit. Here comes the traders. And these traders just happen to be headed to Egypt. They're not headed away from Egypt back toward the east. They're headed from the east back toward Egypt. Think about that. In the right place at the right time with the people heading in the right direction for what ultimately God's going to accomplish. Consider who Potiphar was. When you turn back to chapter 39, Joseph isn't sold to some random person that lives out on the lower Nile on some estate. Joseph is sold to someone who would have had interaction with and been central to Pharaoh's ruling power. Because what we read about Potiphar is that he's sold to the captain of the guard, an Egyptian. When you read captain of the guard, these are the individuals responsible for the protection of Pharaoh himself. This isn't some random army unit out on the outside of the Egyptian power sphere, kind of keeping the rebels at bay. This is a man who's responsible for the protection of the ruler of Egypt. And that's where Joseph finds himself. Which is significant because Joseph is then placed in a prison that is just not any prison. When you read verses 20 through 23 of chapter 39, it says, Joseph's master took and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, a place where the baker and the butler would be. A place, by the way, that not just any prisoner would be taken to, but because Potiphar is who he is, and Joseph is in his house, when he wants to imprison him, he imprisons him here. This is a specific prison with specific people. At the time when a few of those people that are near Pharaoh are going to happen to just come into that prison. Do you see all of the dots lining up? And there he met the butler. Who would remember him? Who would be at the side of Pharaoh when God gives Pharaoh these dreams that no one can interpret? In other words, when we look at Joseph's life, Joseph was right where God wanted him when he wanted him there. We often talk about Esther in this relationship, don't we? That she's just where she needs to be, when she needs to be there for the salvation of Israel. Joseph is the same. Joseph is an example of God's providence. He takes all of these events and he shapes them just so that Joseph is right there when Pharaoh has the dreams and the cupbearer can say, I remember now. Here's the man who can interpret them, and he is brought, and the next thing you know, he's reigning over Egypt, second to Pharaoh, and here comes the brothers, and he's able to save life and bring them into the land. Which, by the way, God had told Abraham his descendants would go into that land, but would come out a great nation. And here all of that is coming to place. This is God's providence. He is orchestrating and arranging things for a greater purpose. Now, Joseph, throughout the course of all this, is who God wants him to be, but ultimately, he had to be right where God wanted him to be so that the brothers would come, the dream, everything. But think about Joseph for a moment. He's honest in reporting about his brothers. He refuses to lie with Potiphar's wife. He will not sin against God. When Pharaoh calls for him and says, I hear you can interpret dreams, read verse 16 with me of Genesis 41, because we didn't read it earlier. I wanted to save it for now. In verse 16, Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Joseph is a man of faith. He says, I'm not going to sin against God. He says, Pharaoh, it's not me. It is God. And when push came to shove and he held the power of life and death over his brothers, he did not seek vengeance upon them. In Genesis 50, after their father has died, there's an interesting scene that occurs, beginning at verse 15 of the text. And this shows you Joseph's heart and attitude the whole time. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive. Man, you hear Joseph? He was sold, he was in prison, he was at every turn there for a decade plus of his life. Everything that could go wrong seemed like it always did go wrong. But he kept faith throughout the course of the entire event. He keeps the faith. He's always looking to God. Potiphar's wife's lying. Well, he's still looking to God. He's in the prison. He's still looking ultimately to God, because when he's called out of that prison, his speech to Pharaoh, his words to Pharaoh convey that to us. This is a man of faith. And now on the other side of it all, boy, he is able to see the big picture, isn't he? He's able to see what God did for him. And so Joseph was really living the dream. He makes a similar statement to this in Genesis 45, 5 through 8, which was read back in 50. I wanted to put it here for you. We're not going to read it for the sake of time at this point. But it is a direct parallel to what we just read in Genesis 50. Joseph says, God did this. Joseph realized he was actually living the dream, because God had put him exactly where he needed to be an instrument for salvation and blessing. Now think about that. All that he went through, all that he endured, and God used that, didn't he? He put him right where he wanted, and Joseph was just who he should have been. When you combine providence and faith, powerful things happen. Esther has to be prodded in that faith by her uncle Mordecai, right? Perhaps you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this, the same kind of concept. But when you put God's providence and a faith that says whatever comes in this life, I'm going to trust God and I'm going to labor through it, tremendous things can happen. When we think of Joseph, 17 years when he's carried away, could not have even started to realize how God would ultimately use his life to accomplish God's own purposes, God's own will. And we see that with many other Bible characters as well. We've mentioned Esther. What about David? Think David had any idea when he was shepherding his father's flock and being called to that tent by Samuel that he was about to be anointed king? Do you think David had any idea that once anointed king, everything that God was going to do and use David to accomplish? Yes, David was a flawed man, just like Abraham was. There's no doubt Joseph wasn't a perfect man in his own right. He's a man. We know he would have sinned at some occasion. But then the apostles, you think about them. You think Peter and Andrew and James and John and Philip, all of them. Paul himself, you think these guys had any idea exactly all that was going to be involved in following Jesus when they first started following him? But they sought him, and they sought him faithfully even to death for most of them, right? Because we know only John, the apostle, the disciple whom Jesus loved, lived to die of old age. Everybody else was martyred for the cause of the kingdom, for Christ himself. Think they had any idea of how God was going to use their lives when they first started down that path? None at all. So the question that I want to ask you is, are we willing to accept God putting us where he wants us and using us how he wants us for the kingdom of Christ and his glory? Are we willing to accept that? Are we willing to accept that in God's providence at times he may put us in situations like Joseph that are not exactly what we would consider enjoyable? That are for a time makes us feel like in this season of life things are really challenging and bad and difficult. And are we willing to be who we still need to be? Just people of faith. To say whatever comes, I'm going to trust God through it. I'm going to walk with him faithfully. I'm going to know that he will use this for good, right? Romans 8:28. We see that in Joseph's life. But are we willing to live it in our own? Moms, I started this and I said, rarely do you hear someone say you're living the dream with that baby spit up and the mess all around. Can I suggest to you you're living the dream? God has you in a great place. You're blessed to be able to hold that child. To have food whereby to feed them, milk whereby to nurse them. You have safety whereby to pat them on that back and get that burp out that brings all the other stuff. You know how it goes. I've had 3 of them. They do it at the most inopportune time sometime. I had to throw away a suit coat because nobody could get it out of it. Just stained. Dry cleaner tried a couple times, said, we can't do it. I said, okay, the trash can. That's living the dream. You are blessed by God to have children. Blessed with the ability to provide for them. That is the dream. And your greatest work in those years is going to be starting to direct those young souls back to their Maker. And that's not something to be frowned upon. That's not something to be minimized. That's not something to look at and say, well, does this really matter? Oh, it matters. It matters so much. Those are souls. Those are young souls trusted to you. Dad, you're working long hours trying to make sure your family's provided for. I'm not talking about the excessive stuff. I'm talking about the normal overtime, taking time where you can. Hey, Mom, you're involved in that too. Single mom, you're trying to do everything you can. Say, I'm not living the dream. The dream would be having a bank account with plenty of money in it. The dream would be having everything I want. I understand those times can be difficult. I grew up in a home where my father was laid off multiple times in my childhood, where there were times we did not have much money or much food. I can understand. I lived through it as the child enduring it, not as the adult doing it. Those can be hard days. But if there is that food to put on the table, even if it's meager, and if you're laboring with those hands and you have young children who love you and just love to see you come home, you're living the dream. You're blessed. Now I use that as an example because I know we have a lot of young families going through a lot right now. But it really doesn't matter what stage of life we're in. There are going to be those moments where we feel like what's happening right now, we can't see anything out of it. But if you're walking by faith, trust that God will use that and bring good from it. Joseph, on the other side, saw all the blessings, didn't he? He saw how God had accomplished his will through him. What a blessing it is to see on the other side how God can use people of faith and his providence to bring you through to the other side. So even when things seem difficult, keep trusting God. Keep leaning upon him. Keep seeking His will. You don't know what's ahead of you. None of us do. But you can be confident of one thing. God is faithful. He was with Joseph. He will be with you. And there are blessings to be found trusting Him, seeking Him, even through the most difficult of days. I mean, there is a reason why James said, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials." And so, brother, sister, if you've been tempted to give up today, if you're struggling right now because life isn't what you thought it was going to be, turn and trust. Now, maybe your faith has been waning and you need the prayers of the church. We're here for you. Maybe sin is part of that equation, and that's why life is what it is. Well, you've got to do something about that, my friend. The brothers ultimately had to face the reality of their own sin, and we all will as well. Better to face it now than before the judge then. God's providence and faith, what a powerful combination. You know, it is said of Jesus there by Paul when he's writing the church of Galatia that God has sent forth His Son, born under woman, born under the law. Just the right time, just the appointed time, Galatians 4:4. God had worked everything to bring about that environment into which He sent His Son. And His Son lived, showing us the way, teaching us the way. And then He offered Himself to make the way unto the Father. And that way stands open to you. All of God's providence, even what we're seeing here in Joseph's life, that's all pointing forward to the cross ultimately, to what He intends to accomplish in Christ Jesus. And He did accomplish it. And what He calls you to do now is to place your faith in Christ Jesus. Jesus Himself is the one who said, "He who believes and is baptized shall be saved," Mark 16:16. "He who believes not shall be condemned." Those are the words of the Lord. You can't possibly ever approach the Lord without coming to believe in Him. But He says, believe and be baptized. And so you need to commit your life unto Him. On the day of Pentecost, Acts 2:38, those were told, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ, for the remission of sin." They'd killed the Son of God. They'd asked, "What shall we do?" And that's what they were told. Repent and be baptized. The choice is yours, my friend. But no, God worked through the ages of mankind's history to bring His Son. And that Son is still the one today who can offer you redemption, so that you can walk in faith, so that you can have a life that no matter what happens, good or bad, when you're walking by faith and trusting the Lord, you know that blessings are on the other side. The invitation's offered. The sermon is yours. If you need to come, will you? So we stand and sing to encourage you.